I grew up in a big family, and in our family, we were committed birthday celebrators. On your birthday, you'd wake up and you'd get the "You Are Special" plate at breakfast and your favorite meal for dinner. And usually one time over the course of the day, Mom would talk about the day you were born. She would drag out the photo albums and exclaim how cute you used to be. "Look at that adorable baby," she would say. "How could we ever imagine the person you have become?" Birthdays are a natural time to look back and see what we have been, because life has a way of taking us places we've never imagined. Today is Pentecost, the birthday of the church, and it's 2 years since you and I started out together on this journey of being the church together in this place. Seems like a good time to look back and gather the courage we need to move forward. The first disciples and all of us would look at each other and say, wow, if we only knew then what we know now. Because the life of faith is a life that takes courage, confronting the unknown with commitment, because, of course, we don't know now what we will know then. This whole Easter season, we've been thinking about how the gospel message, radical love, new life, can be threatening because it upends life in the way that we know it. It makes things that used to be comfortable seem uncomfortable. Today, as we look at the story of Jesus' first followers and their adventures on the day that the church was born, I think we can sense that discomfort. And I always think of the words of naturalist and author Annie Dillard that I like to revisit every year on this day. On the whole, I do not find Christians outside of the catacombs sufficiently sensible of conditions. Does anyone have the foggiest idea what sort of power we blithely invoke? Or, as I suspect, does no one believe a word of it? The churches are children playing on the floor with chemistry sets, mixing up a batch of TNT to kill a Sunday morning. It's madness to wear ladies' straw hats and velvet hats to church. We should be wearing crash helmets. Ushers should issue life preservers and signal flares. They should lash us to our pews. For the sleeping God may wake someday and take offense, or the waking God may draw us out to where we can never return. Yes, Pentecost is the birthday of the church, but it's not a story, as you've heard, about the arrival of a nice, staid institution built to define tradition and maintain it at all costs. No. Pentecost is the threat of resurrection, lived out in full color and wind and fire. It's God shaking things up, as God always seems to do. And those of us along for the ride, holding on for dear life, not exactly sure where we'll end up. All that wind and fire, disruption should have told the first disciples something, but they didn't know what was ahead. Just like you and I don't know what's ahead. I wonder what the first disciples would have done if they knew then what we know now. Just to be able to gauge the disciples' mental and physical well-being on Pentecost, I went online and I completed the Social Readjustment Rating Scale, which rates stressors resulting in personal vulnerability. You have to choose whether some of the following has happened in your life over the course of the last 12 months. Death of a close friend, trouble with the law, change in your family situation, vocational upheaval, among others. So I chose everything on the scale that had happened to those disciples in just the 6 weeks since Jesus' arrest, crucifixion, and resurrection. The test didn't have the option, one of your closest friends is resurrected. I would guess that also counts as a stressor. The ratings go like this: 0 to 149, low susceptibility to stress-related illness. 150 to 299, medium. 300 and over, high. Taking the quiz as the disciples might have, their score was 644. In other words, after what they've been through, it was surprising, shocking that the disciples were not dead. You may be interested to know that I declined the opportunity to take the test myself. Sometimes it's better just not to know. Jerusalem was filled with people from all over that day, the text says. Jews from every part of the region under heaven. Many of them were visiting Jerusalem because it was Shavuot, the Jewish festival of weeks. And devout Jews were required by Jewish law to come to Jerusalem to celebrate. But not all of the people in Jerusalem that day were Jews. There were a lot of worshipers, merchants, travelers to Jerusalem for the holiday, a city packed with people from all over the world. And there they were, packed into that city, and it happened. The overpowering sound of a rushing wind filled the house where the disciples were, slamming doors and flapping shutters and blowing around so hard that they had to cover their ears. And fire came down and rested on each one of them, a flame, the text says, and something else happened. They were filled with the Spirit, and everyone started talking in other languages. And all of a sudden, everybody in the city of Jerusalem, all of the foreigners providing services, all of the visitors to the city, all of them understood the disciples in their very own languages. The Spirit arrived, and the gospel was proclaimed, and a whole crowd of people heard it, and it radiated out from that moment. And from right then, everything changed. If only the disciples had known then what was ahead for them, that the nice, comfortable, familiar city of Jerusalem was not their destination, it was just their starting point. That their understanding of God through tradition and structure they had always known was not what their futures held. That they could encounter God outside of the temple. That upper room filled with familiar faces even suddenly became a thing of the past. That room couldn't possibly hold all the people who wanted to hear, who had opinions to offer, who had voices to add to the conversation. That being followers of this resurrected God would take them to places they never imagined. A wind had blown in, fire alighted, the Spirit of God had arrived, and if they had only known then what we know now, if they had, would they have embraced the crash helmets, the life preservers, the signal flares that were indicated by all that wind and fire? Because you and I can look back over 2,000 years of history and we could tell those disciples, you're going to be martyred. This little community you love so much is going to lose its prophetic edge. It will be co-opted by empire. The church will become a bastion of corruption, known for things like the Crusades, indulgences, colonization, slavery. The church will have a hand in excluding women and breeding racism and thousands of suicides of GLBTQ people who heard and hear again, even this week, that they are not welcome in the Church of Jesus Christ. Whew. If those disciples had known then what we know now, I wonder if they would have stepped out in faith that day. And what about us? 2 Pentecosts ago, we set out on this journey of being the church together. In those 2 years, we could not have known all that we have experienced together. And I wonder, if we had, would we have had the courage to set out on the journey? It's been hard. There's been a lot of change. We've felt the threat of resurrection all around us. We've said goodbye to people we loved. We've welcomed new ways of doing worship, new faces in leadership. Some situations have been painful. Some days, We wanted to throw in the towel. The work and worry and care of this community seemed overwhelming. How could we have imagined only 2 years ago the journey of change and transition and growth that we have been on together? The disciples did not know then what we know now, but here's what I think gave them the courage to step out in faith. They had a dream. They had a dream of a radical love lived in community that could change the world, that has changed the world, because the disciples did not know then what we know now, but maybe they suspected that the church would begin with little communities holding possessions in common and being family to each other, that these communities would empower women as their leaders and would welcome folks that everyone else excluded. They didn't know, but maybe they imagined that the church could birth movements like abolition and suffrage and workers' rights and prison reform, religious freedom for all people and civil rights too. Maybe they suspected that if they just had the courage to follow the lively wind of God's Spirit to places they couldn't see, the church might found hospitals and build schools and empower minority communities who were excluded from power elsewhere. It would become a platform for speaking up against misogyny and welcoming the stranger and standing arm in arm in the face of powerful opposition, saying, "We will overcome and love will win." This is the church the disciples hoped for, and in its best moments, this is what the church has been. And what about us? Maybe we're here because we did not know then what we know now, that we are part of a community that speaks up often and loudly about racism, the destruction of our planet, the rampant escalation of gun violence in our culture, the oppression of women, the value and worth of LGBTQ people, and so many other issues. That we are all consistently invited into healing and hope, and that we walk along this journey with so many faithful people who love us and who accept us just as we are. That we, Riverside Church, have the unique invitation to step into the beauty and pain of diverse community, that we know there are people who will be there when our lives fall apart, and that our children, their little lives and minds and hearts and souls are being cherished and nurtured in this place, that new disciples are encountering this community and risking the possibility that they might follow Jesus too, that our minds are engaged and our hearts challenged as we grow in our faith, that we have here in this place, the Church of Jesus Christ, a place of hope and promise in a cold and hard world. This is what this church has been in its best moments. This is what the church and this church can and must be next. Like the disciples on that day of Pentecost, you and I stand every day on the edge of something. And today, Pentecost is the day that we collectively stand on the edge of all we can do and be as the church in the world. The future is unknown. And if experience teaches us anything, we know it will be painful sometimes. We do not know now what we will know in another 2 years or 2,000 years. But like the first disciples, be bold we must. The dream of healing, hope, justice, peace, beloved community, it's too important to shrink back to the familiar. In the fear of the unknown, be assured, the Spirit of God is alive and well in this place. And as she blows through our community today, hear her whisper this challenge to us. Bring everybody to the table. everybody. Trust each other. Don't be afraid to fail. Take a risk. View the future with curiosity and hope. Step out in faith in whatever direction God is leading us next. Believe in each other. Believe in God. It's Pentecost, friends, and the wind is blowing and the fire is burning and God is up to something. We can never know now what we will know years from now. But today we step out in courage. Happy birthday, church. When you were born, we could have never imagined what you have become. Amen.